My business partner of 6 years had been stealing from our clients for 14 months. I found out on a Tuesday morning before she arrived at the office. She had been my business partner for 6 years. She knew every password, every client, every account. And on the morning I found out what she had done, I realized that the most dangerous person in my professional life had been sitting across from me at our shared desk the entire time. I want to tell you what kind of business partner Renee was before I tell you what she did, because if I start with what she did, you will think I was naive and maybe I was. But I want you to understand why. First, I want you to understand the specific texture of 6 years of trust before I tell you what 6 years of trust turned out to be worth when it was tested. Because the thing about being betrayed by someone you genuinely believed in is that the betrayal does not just damage the present. It reaches backward through every memory you have of that person and deposits a question mark at the end of each one. And you spend weeks going back through those memories trying to find the moment you should have seen it and not finding it and not knowing whether that means it was not there or whether it means you were not looking hard enough. Renee and I met at a business networking event 7 years ago. I was 28, she was 31, and we were both at the same table trying to look more established than we were. She was sharp in the way that makes you want to be in the room with someone. Quick with numbers, quick with people, the kind of person who could read a client in the first 5 minutes of a meeting and know exactly what they needed to hear without appearing to be doing anything other than listening. I was strong on the creative and strategic side, weaker on the financial and operational side, and she was the precise opposite. We complemented each other in the way that makes a business partnership feel inevitable rather than chosen. Like the decision had already been made somewhere before either of us arrived at that table, and we were just catching up to it. We talked for 3 hours at that event. We exchanged numbers, we met for coffee the following week, and then again the week after that. By the third meeting, we were sketching out what a business together might look like on the back of a paper placemat in a diner that has since closed down. I kept that placemat for 4 years. I do not know where it is now. I have stopped looking for it. We started Clarity Solutions 18 months after that networking event, a boutique consulting firm specializing in operational efficiency for mid-sized companies. It sounds dry when I describe it that way, but the work was genuinely interesting and we were good at it in a way that surprised even us in the early years. The first year was hard in the way first years always are. We worked from my spare bedroom, took every client we could get, ate through our savings more than we had planned, and had at least 3 conversations each about whether we had made a catastrophic mistake. We kept going not because we were certain it would work, but because we were both the kind of people who finish what they start, and because even in the hardest months, the work itself felt worth doing. By the end of year 2, we had 6 retainer clients and had moved into a small office. By the end of year 3, we had 14 clients, 4 employees, and a revenue figure that made both of us sit quietly for a moment when we first saw it projected on a screen. We had one of those silences that does not need to be filled because what is sitting inside it is enough. Renee looked at me across the conference table we had bought secondhand from a company that was downsizing, and she said we actually did it, and I said, I know, and neither of us said anything else for a while. By year 5, Clarity Solutions was something I was genuinely proud of, in the specific way you are proud of something you built from a paper placemat in a diner. We had 18 clients, 8 full-time employees, a reputation in our sector that had taken years of careful relationship building to establish. We had turned down acquisition offers twice, not because the money was not interesting, but because neither of us was ready to hand something we had built to someone else to run. We had disagreements over the years, real ones, about direction and hiring and how aggressively to grow, but we had always found our way through them because we had a shared belief in what Clarity Solutions was supposed to be that was stronger than any individual disagreement. Renee and I had a 50-50 partnership. Every decision made together, every contract signed by both of us, every win celebrated over the same bottle of wine we had been buying since year 1 when we could barely afford it and kept buying as a ritual even after we could afford considerably better. I trusted her completely. I want to be precise about that word. Not mostly, not generally, completely. In 6 years of partnership, I had never once had a reason to question anything she did or said in a professional context. She was meticulous, transparent, and held herself to a standard that made me hold myself to a higher one just by proximity. When our accountant flagged something, she was the first to want it investigated. When a client relationship became complicated, she was the one who insisted on having the hard conversation rather than letting it drift. She was the person I called when something went wrong at 11 p.m., and she was the person I called when something went right at 7 a.m., and in 6 years, I had never once ended either of those calls feeling like I was talking to someone who was anything other than exactly who they appeared to be, which is why what I found on a Tuesday morning in October took so long to fully land. I had come into the office early, not for any particular reason. I was sleeping badly that month for personal reasons I will not go into, and had found that being at my desk by 7 gave me a head start that made the day feel more manageable. The office was empty and quiet in the way offices are before the day starts, before the noise and the movement and the emails that need responding to. I made coffee in the small kitchen we had spent 3 weeks arguing about whether to renovate, and had eventually renovated, and had both agreed was worth it. I sat at my desk with my coffee, and I opened the previous month's client billing reconciliation. This was something I did periodically, not on a schedule, not out of suspicion, just as part of the general due diligence I had always believed was part of being a responsible partner in a business that had other people's livelihoods attached to it. Renee handled the day-to-day financials. She was better at it than me, and we had agreed early on that playing to our strengths was smarter than insisting on equal involvement in every function, but I reviewed things periodically. I always had. Renee knew I did and had never expressed anything other than support for it. The first thing I noticed was a billing entry that did not match the client contract I had in my files. A small difference. $1,700 billed above the contracted rate to a client we had been working with for 2 years. A client I liked personally, a founder named Marcus, who had built a distribution company from nothing, and who reminded me in certain ways of myself, and who trusted us with the kind of access that takes years to earn. I pulled his contract file. The contracted rate was clear, the billing did not match it. I assumed it was an administrative error and made a note to ask Renee about it when she came in. Then I looked at the previous month for the same client. Same discrepancy, different amount, but the same pattern of billing above the contracted rate. I went back 6 months. Every single month showed a variation between what the contract specified and what had been billed. The variations were small enough individually that they would not trigger an immediate alarm in a routine review, but consistent enough that when I added them up across 6 months, the total discrepancy on that one client alone was just over $14,000. I sat at my desk and I did not move for a long time. The coffee went cold beside me. Outside the window, the street was doing its ordinary morning thing. Inside the office, everything looked exactly the same as it always did, and something underneath all of it had shifted in a way I could not yet fully see the shape of. Then I pulled every active client file we had. I went through them one by one with the specific focused calm of someone who is hoping to find something and dreading finding it simultaneously. The first 3 files were clean. The fourth showed a discrepancy going back 8 months. The fifth was clean. The sixth showed a pattern going back 11 months. By the time I had been through 11 files, I had found 8 with billing discrepancies of varying sizes and durations. I built a spreadsheet as I went, adding each discrepancy to a running total, watching the number grow in a way that made my hands feel strange on the keyboard. The total across all 8 clients was just under $94,000 billed above contracted rates over a period of between 4 and 14 months depending on the client. $94,000 that had gone through our billing system, been paid by clients who trusted us with their businesses, and had landed somewhere that was not our shared business account. I checked the business account thoroughly, going back 14 months. The discrepancies were not there. The money had been separated at some point between billing and deposit, and I did not yet know the mechanics of how, but I had a very clear and very unwelcome idea about who had arranged it and how long it had been happening and what it meant for everything I thought I had been building for the last 6 years. It was 8:15 by the time I finished. I had been at my desk for over an hour and 15 minutes, and I had not moved except to pour coffee. I did not drink and to pull files from the cabinet behind me. My hands were steady. I noticed that specifically. I had expected them to shake, and they did not, and I could not decide if that was a good sign or just what shock felt like when it arrived quietly instead of loudly. Renee arrived at 8:40 with 2 coffees, the way she always did on Tuesdays, because she passed a specific coffee shop on Tuesdays that she preferred and had been bringing me the same order for 4 years without ever asking if I still wanted it, because she knew I did. She set mine on my desk and said good morning and asked if I had slept better. I said a little. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook behind her desk the way she did every morning and sat down and opened her laptop. She had not yet looked at me properly. I asked her to sit on the other side of the desk. She looked up then. She read something in my face that made her close her laptop without being told to and moved to the chair across from me. I put the spreadsheet on the desk between us. She looked at it for a long time. I watched her face the way you watch someone's face, when you are trying to find the person you thought you knew inside the expression they are wearing right now. She did not perform surprise. She did not reach for an immediate explanation. She just looked at the spreadsheet with the stillness of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and has just understood that the moment has arrived. She said she could explain. I said I was listening. What came out over the next hour was not the version of events I had prepared myself for in the 40 minutes between finding the discrepancies and her arrival. I had prepared for calculation, for a sustained and deliberate scheme constructed with the specific care of someone who had decided to take from a person who trusted them. What I actually heard was more complicated, and in some ways harder to process because it did not fit cleanly into the version of Renee I had been assembling in the hour before she walked through the door. Renee had a brother named Philip. I knew this. Their relationship was complicated in ways she had shared with me selectively over the years. What I had not known was what complicated actually meant in full. Philip had been in serious financial trouble for nearly 2 years, not ordinary debt or poor financial decisions. The kind of trouble that involves people who are not patient about repayment and who have methods of expressing that impatience that go well beyond strongly worded letters. Renee had discovered the extent of it 18 months ago, when Philip had called her from a hospital after an incident she described carefully without describing in detail. She had understood in that phone call that if she did not help him, the consequences would be severe, and that the consequences would not stop at Philip. She had started helping him out of her own salary. Every month, as much as she could manage without affecting her own stability, transferred to Philip's account to keep the situation from escalating. For 4 months, this had worked in the sense that it had kept things from getting worse, without actually resolving anything. Then her own finances had tightened for reasons she did not fully explain, and the amount she could transfer had dropped, and Philip's situation had moved into a more urgent phase, and she had made a decision that she described to me as temporary. A small adjustment to one client's billing, just enough to cover the gap. Just for 1 month while she figured out another solution. 1 month became 3. 3 became 6. The small adjustment became a pattern across multiple clients as the amount Philip needed grew and the solution she had promised herself she would find did not materialize. She had told herself each month that it was the last month. She had genuinely believed it each time, she said, which I found both plausible and devastating in equal measure. Not because it excused anything, but because I knew Renee well enough to believe that she had not set out to build a 14-month scheme. She had set out to solve an immediate problem and had looked up 14 months later and found herself inside something she did not know how to get out of. She had not spent the money on herself. She said this clearly, and I believed it, not because she said it, but because I knew her well enough to know that the money was never what this was about. Every dollar had gone to Philip, to keep him safe, to buy time she kept hoping would eventually become a real solution. The money had gone from our clients through our billing system to Renee's account to Philip's account, and from there into the hands of people whose names she did not share with me, and whose methods she had described only as serious. She finished talking and sat across from me in the chair on the other side of our shared desk, and she did not ask me to understand. She did not ask me to forgive her. She said she knew there was no version of what she had done that was acceptable, and that she was not going to insult me by trying to construct one. She said she was sorry in the specific way of someone who understands that the word is a fraction of what the moment requires and is saying it anyway because it is the only thing left to offer. I sat across from my business partner of 6 years in the office we had built together, from a paper placemat and a secondhand conference table, and a shared belief that we were building something worth building, and I felt something move through me that I still do not have a clean name for. Not just betrayal, not just anger, though the anger was real and present and sitting underneath everything else, like a fire that had not yet decided how large it was going to get. Something more like the specific grief of watching a version of your life that you had believed was solid reveal itself as something that had been quietly compromised for 14 months without your knowledge. The grief of a loss that you had not yet fully absorbed, but that you already knew was certain. I told her I needed her to leave the office for the day. She stood immediately. She picked up her bag and her coat from the hook behind her desk. At the door, she turned around and said she would understand whatever I decided. She said she hoped I knew that regardless of everything she had meant, every word she had ever said about what we built together and what it meant to her. I did not respond. She held my silence for a moment and then she left. The door closed behind her. I sat in our office alone and I listened to the sound of the building doing its ordinary Tuesday morning things around me, and I did not make a single phone call or send a single email for the rest of the morning. I just sat there with the spreadsheet on the desk in front of me and tried to figure out what a person does when the thing they built their professional life around turns out to have been standing on ground they did not fully know. By noon, I had my answer, not about what to do about Renee, that was going to take longer and involve people with more expertise than me, but about what kind of person I was going to be in the aftermath of this. I had two choices available to me. I could let what Renee had done make me into someone who trusted less, built walls earlier, held people at a distance that felt like protection. Or I could do the harder thing, which was to understand what had happened fully and respond to it with the same deliberateness and integrity that I had always tried to bring to everything we had built together. Not for Renee's sake, for mine. Because I had spent 6 years building something I was proud of, and I was not going to let 14 months of someone else's desperation turn me into someone I was not proud of in the process of responding to it. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. My personal lawyer was a woman named Adise, who had handled my affairs since before Clarity Solutions existed. I did not call the business lawyer Renee, and I shared because I was not ready to involve anyone connected to both of us until I had a clearer picture of where I stood individually. Adise answered on the second ring, and I told her everything I had found and everything Renee had told me in the order it had happened. Adise listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me 4 questions in quick succession. She asked if I had documented everything I had found before Renee arrived. I said I had a detailed spreadsheet with every discrepancy itemized by client, date, and amount, and that I had printed copies of every relevant billing record and contract before Renee had walked through the door. Daisy said that was good. She asked if Renee still had access to our business accounts and systems. I said yes, as far as I knew, because I had not yet done anything to change that. Daisy said that needed to change today, before the end of business, and that I should document the exact time the access was revoked. She asked if any of our clients had raised the billing discrepancies directly with us. I said not that I was aware of, but that I could not be certain. She said that was something we needed to get ahead of, and that the way I handled the client communication in the next 48 hours was going to matter significantly. The fourth question she asked was whether I wanted to pursue this criminally, civilly, or both, and whether I was open to a private resolution with Renee before deciding. I said I did not know yet, and that I needed to understand my options before I made any decisions I could not take back. She said that was the right answer and that she would clear her afternoon, and I should come in at 2. I spent the time between that phone call and leaving for Adaise's office doing 3 things. I revoked Renee's access to every business account and system we shared, documented the time and method of each revocation, and sent her a brief professional email informing her that access had been suspended, pending a review of company financials, and that I would be in touch through counsel. I did not use accusatory language. Adise had advised against it, and I understood why. Then I called our accountant, a methodical man named Stuart, who had been with us since year 2, and asked him to conduct a full audit of the company financials going back 18 months without telling him why. Stuart asked if everything was all right. I said I would explain when I had more information. He said he would start immediately. Then I sat at my desk for the remaining 40 minutes before I needed to leave, and I did something I had not done since the early days of Clarity Solutions, when the uncertainty of whether we would survive had been a daily companion. I went through the client list one by one and thought about each relationship. What we had built with each client, what they trusted us with, what $94,000 of overbilling meant in the context of each of those relationships, and what it was going to cost us to address it honestly. The meeting with Adise lasted 3 hours. She had a colleague present who specialized in financial fraud cases, and between the two of them, they walked me through the full range of what had happened legally, what my exposure was as the other partner, what Renee's exposure was, and what the realistic options were for resolution. The exposure question was the one that sat heaviest. Because Clarity Solutions was a 50-50 partnership, and because the billing had gone through our shared systems, and because my name was on every client contract alongside Renee's, the question of what I had known and when I had known it was going to matter if any of this became public or legal. Adai said my position was strong because I had found it, documented it, and reported it to counsel immediately. She said the audit I had commissioned from Stuart would help establish the timeline clearly. She said the next 48 hours were critical, and that how I handled the client communication specifically was going to shape how this resolved. We agreed on an approach. I would contact each of the 8 affected clients personally before the end of the week. I would explain that a billing discrepancy had been identified in their account during a routine internal review, that we were investigating the cause, and that they would receive a full reconciliation and reimbursement of any overbilled amounts within 30 days. I would not name Renee. I would not explain the circumstances beyond what was necessary. I would be honest about the fact that an error had occurred and clear about the fact that we were fixing it. Daisy said most clients in a situation like this respond better to a direct and proactive acknowledgement than to discovering it themselves later, and that the reimbursement commitment would matter more than the explanation. She was right about that. I made the first client call on Wednesday morning. Marcus, the founder whose account had shown the largest single discrepancy, listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said he appreciated me calling directly and that he would wait for the reconciliation before deciding anything further. He did not ask me to explain more than I had offered. He said he had trusted us for 2 years and that the call itself told him something important about whether that trust had been misplaced. I said I hoped the reconciliation would tell him the rest. We got off the phone and I sat with that conversation for a long time. It was the best possible version of how that call could have gone, and it had still been one of the hardest professional conversations I had ever had. By Friday, I had spoken to all 8 clients. 2 of them asked more detailed questions than I was prepared to fully answer, and I told them honestly that the investigation was ongoing and that I would have more information for them once it was complete. One of them, a CFO named Patricia, who had been with us for 3 years and who I had always found direct to the point of being occasionally uncomfortable, asked me point blank whether this was a partner issue. I said I was not in a position to discuss the specifics of an ongoing investigation. She said that was a yes. I said I appreciated her patience. She said she would wait for the reconciliation and that she expected a full accounting when it was available. I said she would have it. We got off the phone, and I thought about Patricia's directness and decided I had always actually liked it and that I liked it more now than I ever had before. Stuart completed the audit the following week. The final number was $91,400, slightly lower than my initial calculation because 2 of the discrepancies I had identified turned out to have legitimate explanations I had missed in my initial review. The remaining amount was clear, documented, and unambiguous. Adais presented the audit findings to Renee's lawyer on a Thursday afternoon. Renee did not contest a single figure. The negotiation that followed took 3 weeks. I will not detail every element of it because some of it is still under a confidentiality agreement that I intend to honor. What I will tell you is the outcome because I think the outcome is the part that matters for understanding what this story is actually about. Renee signed a personal repayment agreement for the full $91,400. The repayment was structured over 36 months, with the first payment due within 14 days of signing. She relinquished her 50% stake in Clarity Solutions in exchange for a negotiated settlement that was considerably less than the market value of that stake, and that we both understood was the only arrangement that made any sense given the circumstances. She signed a non-disclosure agreement. She signed a non-compete for a period of 2 years in our sector, and she provided a full written account of the mechanics of what she had done and how, which Stuart and Adais needed for the audit trail and which I have read exactly once and have not read again. On the day everything was signed, I sat in Adais's conference room after everyone else had left, and I looked at the stack of documents on the table in front of me. And I thought about a networking event 7 years ago, and a paper placemat in a diner, and a secondhand conference table and a bottle of wine we had kept buying as a ritual. I thought about the phone calls at 11 p.m. and the ones at 7 a.m. I thought about 6 years of building something I was proud of with someone I had trusted completely, and what it cost to find out that complete trust is a thing that exists in you rather than in the other person, and that the difference between those 2 locations is everything. I did not feel triumphant sitting in that conference room. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect a story like this to end with triumph, and this one did not end that way. It ended with a stack of legal documents and a business I now owned entirely and a $91,000 debt being repaid in monthly installments by someone who had been my closest professional relationship for 6 years. It ended with 8 client relationships that were going to require sustained and careful rebuilding over the next 12 to 18 months. It ended with a staff of 8 people who had noticed the change in the atmosphere of the office over the preceding weeks and who deserved a version of the truth that I had been carefully preparing with Adais's guidance. It ended, in other words, the way most real endings end. Not with resolution exactly, with the beginning of what comes after. Let us see what Reddit had to say about this. User Practical Priya says, "The way you handled this is one of the most professionally composed responses to betrayal I have ever read on this platform. You found it, documented it, called your lawyer before anyone else, and did not blow up 6 years of client relationships in the process. That is not something most people are capable of when they are sitting across from someone they trusted completely and finding out what that trust actually cost them." User Devil's Advocate Dave says, I am not excusing what Renee did because what she did was indefensible. But she was not stealing to fund a lifestyle or take something she felt entitled to. She was stealing to keep someone she loved alive. That does not make it right. It makes it human. And I think there is a difference between those two things that matters even when the outcome is the same. User Tired of Soft People says, $91,000 taken from clients who trusted this business over 14 months is not a momentary lapse driven by desperation. That is a sustained, deliberate course of action continued every single month while looking her partner in the face and saying nothing. The brother situation explains the why. It does not change the what. User Quiet Observer 99 says, the detail that gets me is that she did not perform surprise when OP put the spreadsheet on the desk. She just looked at it. She had been waiting for that moment, which means she sat across from OP every single day, knowing it was coming and continuing anyway. I genuinely do not know how you do that to someone who trusts you completely. User Justice for Host says, the fact that Renee did not contest a single figure in the audit tells you everything. There was no version of the numbers she could dispute because she had done the numbers herself. She knew every dollar to the cent. She just hoped the spreadsheet would never be opened. User Fair and Square 44 says, the line about complete trust living in you rather than in the other person is the truest thing I have read on this platform in a long time. That is not something you arrive at easily. That is something you understand only after it costs you something significant to learn. User Never Again. Nora says, Renee had 14 months to find a version that did not require anyone to lose everything. 14 months of individual moments where she could have told OP what was happening and asked for help finding another way. She chose not to. Every single month, she chose not to. The resolution OP describes sounds like exactly what choosing not to costs. User Straight Talk Susan says, I have worked in financial services for 15 years. What Renee did is a crime, a sustained financial crime against multiple businesses. The private resolution was generous and practical, and I understand why it was chosen, but let no one minimize what it actually was. $91,000, 14 months, 8 clients. That is not a mistake. That is a decision made over and over again every single month for over a year. Update 1. OP came back with an update. I posted the original account about 3 weeks after the legal documents were signed because I needed somewhere to put it that was outside of me and because I had been carrying it alone for long enough that the weight of it had started to affect things I did not want it to affect. What I did not expect was the volume of responses or the specific quality of some of them. I read every comment. I want to address some of them before I tell you what has happened since, because I think the responses deserve more than silence. To Devil's Advocate Dave and Middle Ground Mike specifically, I have thought about what both of you said more than you probably know. The question of whether there was a version of this resolution that did not require Renee to lose everything simultaneously is one I have sat with since before the documents were signed. I want to be honest about that. There were conversations between my lawyer and Renee's lawyer where different arrangements were on the table, where the stake relinquishment was not necessarily a given, and where the repayment structure took different shapes. I considered all of them. What I kept coming back to was not anger and not a desire to punish. It was a practical question about whether a 50-50 partnership could survive what had happened to it, and whether the answer to that question was one I could live with professionally and personally over the years it would take to rebuild. The answer was no. Not because I could not have found a way to be in a room with Renee, but because the clients whose trust we needed to rebuild were going to be doing so in the context of a business whose structure they were aware of. Keeping Renee as a 50% partner while managing the client reconciliation process would have required a level of compartmentalization that I did not believe was sustainable and that I did not think was fair to the clients who deserved to know that the person responsible for the billing decisions in their accounts was no longer in a position to make those decisions. The resolution was not about punishment. It was about building something going forward that I could stand behind completely, the same way I had always tried to stand behind Clarity Solutions completely, and I could not do that with the partnership intact. To longtime lurker who asked about Philip. Yes, I found out, not through Renee directly, but through the process of the investigation, which required a fairly thorough accounting of where the money had gone and why. Philip's situation was as serious as the description of it suggested. The people involved were real, and the methods they used were real, and the amount Renee had been sending each month had been the difference between a situation that was dangerous and a situation that was worse than dangerous. I am not going to share more detail than that, because it involves people who are not part of the story in any way they chose to be. What I will say is that knowing the full context of what Philip was facing did not change my decision about the resolution, but it did change something in how I understood Renee's. Not the 14 months of choosing not to tell me, that I still cannot fully make peace with, but the original decision to help, that I understood in a way I had not before I knew the details. Now, let me tell you what has actually happened since the documents were signed, because some of it I did not anticipate, and some of it has been harder than I expected, and some of it has surprised me in ways I am still processing. The client reconciliations went out within the 30-day window I had committed to. Every affected client received a full accounting of the discrepancy in their billing, a reimbursement check for the exact overbilled amount, and a letter from me personally that I wrote 7 drafts of before I was satisfied with it. The letter did not explain the circumstances beyond what was necessary. It acknowledged that a billing error had occurred in their account, that it had been identified during an internal review, that the enclosed reimbursement covered the full amount of the discrepancy, and that we were implementing additional financial oversight processes to ensure it could not happen again. I signed every letter by hand. Not because a daisy told me to, because I wanted each of those clients to know that I had personally touched every piece of correspondence related to something that had happened on my watch in my company. 6 of the 8 clients stayed with us. I want to sit with that number for a moment because I think it deserves more than a quick mention. 6 out of 8 clients who had been overbilled for between 4 and 14 months, who had received a letter acknowledging a billing error in their account, who had every right and reason to terminate their relationship with Clarity Solutions immediately, chose to stay. Marcus stayed. Patricia stayed, which surprised me more than any of the others given how directly she had asked me whether it was a partner issue during our initial phone call. I called Patricia the day after her signed continuation agreement came through and asked her why. She said, because you called me before I found out myself, and because the reimbursement check arrived on the date you said it would, and because in 3 years of working with your firm, I have never once had a reason to question your integrity specifically. And I decided to bet on that rather than on the thing that went wrong. I thanked her. She said, do not thank me. Just make sure the new oversight processes are real and not just language in a letter. I said they were real. She said, good. We got off the phone and I sat with that conversation for a long time. Patricia is not someone who says things she does not mean. The fact that she chose to stay on the basis of my integrity specifically, rather than the firm's reputation generally, was the most professionally significant thing anyone said to me in the entire aftermath of this situation. I have not forgotten it, and I do not intend to. The 2 clients who left were professional about it. One of them sent a brief email saying they had decided to move their account in a different direction and wished us well. The other asked for a final meeting, which I attended in person, and which lasted 45 minutes, and which I will not detail here because it was a private conversation between professionals, and it deserves to stay that way. I walked out of that meeting understanding their decision completely and respecting it without reservation. The staff situation was the one I had been most anxious about and the one that ultimately went better than I had feared. I held a company meeting 10 days after the documents were signed. I told the team that a financial irregularity had been identified in the company accounts, that it had been addressed through a legal process that was now complete, and that the irregularity had originated with a decision made by a former partner who was no longer with the company. I told them that 6 of our 8 affected clients had chosen to continue their relationship with us and that the company was financially stable and that my commitment to Clarity Solutions and to every person in that room was unchanged. I answered every question they asked directly and declined to answer 2 questions that touched on confidential elements of the legal resolution, explaining why I could not answer those specifically. The meeting lasted an hour and 20 minutes. When it was over, my head of operations, a woman named Blessing, who had been with us since year 2 and who I trust more than almost anyone in the professional context of my life, came and found me in my office afterward and closed the door and said one thing. She said, I want you to know that everyone in that room came in not knowing what to expect and left knowing exactly who they work for, and that matters more than you probably realize right now. I did not respond immediately because I was not entirely sure I could. I said thank you. She said you are welcome. She went back to her desk. I sat in my office for a while after that. The first monthly payment from Renee arrived on the date specified in the agreement. It arrived as a bank transfer, no accompanying message, just the amount and a reference number. I confirmed receipt through Adaise's office and filed it. I do not know what it cost Renee to make that transfer. I do not know what her life looks like right now or how she is managing the combination of the repayment obligation and whatever Philip's situation has become in the months since everything was resolved. I have not contacted her, and she has not contacted me, and I think that silence is the right thing for both of us right now, even if it sits strangely after 6 years of never going more than a few days without speaking. I have been running Clarity Solutions alone for 11 weeks now. It is different in ways I expected, and different in ways I did not. The ways I expected are the practical ones: more decisions landing on my desk, more things requiring my attention that previously would have been handled before they reached me, a broader span of responsibility that has required me to restructure how I spend my time and to be honest with myself about which parts of the operational side I need to hire for rather than absorb personally. I have started that process. I have two strong candidates for a new financial director role that I intend to fill before the end of the quarter. A day's helped me design an oversight structure for that role that builds in the kind of checks that would have made what Renee did significantly harder to sustain. Not impossible. People who are determined find ways. But harder, and harder matters. The ways I did not expect are less practical and harder to describe. The office feels different in a way I notice most in the early mornings. When I am in, before everyone else, the way I was on the Tuesday this all began, it is quieter in a specific way that has nothing to do with the number of people in it. There is a chair on the other side of my desk that nobody sits in now during the day in the way Renee used to sit in it. I have considered moving the furniture and I have not done it yet. I think I am waiting until it stops feeling like something I am doing in reaction to her absence and starts feeling like something I am doing because I want the space to look a certain way. That distinction matters to me, even if it sounds small. I am telling you all of this because I said I would update and because I think updates that only cover the professional resolution miss the part of the story that actually matters most. The professional resolution is clean. The documents are signed, the clients are addressed, the staff have been told what they needed to know, the oversight structure is being built. That part of this is as resolved as it is going to get in the short term, and I am at peace with how it was handled. The part that is not clean is the human part. The 6 years that preceded the Tuesday morning, the paper placemat and the secondhand conference table and the bottle of wine and the calls at 11 p.m., the version of Renee that existed in those 6 years, and that I still do not fully know how to locate in relation to the version that made 14 months of monthly decisions to take from the clients we had spent years building trust with. I do not think those two versions are entirely separate people. I think they are the same person under different pressures, making different choices, and that the version I knew for 6 years was real, and the version that made those choices for 14 months was also real, and that the task of holding both of those things as true simultaneously without letting one cancel the other is the work I am going to be doing for a long time after the documents are filed and the payments arrive and the office chair stays empty. I do not have a clean way to end this update. I am not sure clean endings are available for situations like this one. What I have is a company I built that is still standing, clients who chose to bet on my integrity when they had every reason not to, a staff of 8 people who came into a meeting not knowing what to expect and left knowing who they work for, a financial oversight structure that did not exist 3 months ago and that exists now because something broke and I decided to fix it properly rather than just fix it, and a version of myself that has been through something significant and come out the other side not triumphant and not destroyed, but clear. Clearer than I have been about what I am building and why and who I am building it with, and what complete trust actually means, and where it actually lives. That feels like enough for now. I will update again when there is something worth updating. Reddit had a lot to say about that update. User Practical Priya says, 6 out of 8 clients staying after a billing error letter is not luck. That is 6 years of relationship building that was strong enough to survive a direct hit. You cannot manufacture that in a crisis. OP had it because she spent 6 years earning it. User Tired of Soft People says, Blessing closing that office door after the staff meeting and saying what she said is the moment in this entire story that got me most. You build correctly for 6 years and you do not know if it worked until something goes wrong and the people around you show you what they think of you. That moment showed OP exactly what 6 years of doing it right had actually built. User Quiet Observer 99 says, $91,000 over 14 months to people who use serious collection methods. That is not a problem that got out of hand. That is a situation where someone's life was genuinely at risk. I am not changing my position on what Renee did, but I am sitting with the weight of what she was carrying alone for 14 months while maintaining a partnership and keeping a secret that got heavier every single month. User Watching From Afar says, the empty chair that OP has not moved yet because she is waiting until it stops feeling like a reaction and starts feeling like a choice. That level of self awareness in the middle of rebuilding something significant tells me everything about whether Clarity Solutions is going to survive this. It will. User new chapter, Nancy says, the new oversight structure that makes what happened harder, but not impossible. And OP being honest about that distinction. That is how you actually protect something. Not by pretending you have eliminated all risk, but by reducing it deliberately and knowing exactly what you have and have not solved. OP came back with a second update, and this one closes everything out. I debated whether to post this final update for a long time. Not because there is nothing to say, but because some of what I have to say sits in a place that is harder to articulate than the professional details of the first two posts, and I was not sure I was ready to articulate it publicly. I have decided that the people who followed this story from the beginning deserve a proper ending, and that I deserve to write one. So here it is. It has been 7 months since the documents were signed. 7 months since the first post went up, and the comments section filled with people who had thoughts about Renee and about me and about what the right resolution looked like from the outside of a situation they were reading about on a screen. 7 months of running Clarity Solutions alone, of rebuilding client relationships, of restructuring how the business operates, of hiring a financial director named Jerome, who started 6 weeks ago, and who is exactly what the role needed, and who asked better questions in his first week than I expected, and who I am cautiously optimistic about. In the specific way you are cautiously optimistic about someone new after something like this, the professional side of things is stable. I want to say that clearly before I get into the part that is less clean. The 6 clients who stayed are still with us. 2 of them have expanded their retainer agreements since the reconciliation, which I did not anticipate, and which meant more to me professionally than any new client win could have in the same period. Jerome's oversight structure is functioning the way it was designed to function. The new business pipeline is healthy. The 8 employees who were in that staff meeting 7 months ago are all still here, and the atmosphere in the office has returned to something that feels like itself rather than like a place that is recovering from something. It took longer than I expected for that shift to happen, and I am glad it did happen, and I notice it every morning when I come in early the way I always have. The financial director hire was the single most important decision I made in the aftermath of all of this, and I want to explain why, because I think it is easy to read it as a purely practical response to what happened and miss what it actually represented. Hiring Jerome meant admitting something I had never fully admitted in 6 years of partnership with Renee, which is that I am not naturally strong on the financial and operational side of this business, and that I had addressed that gap by trusting a partner completely, rather than by building structural accountability into the systems themselves. Renee had been both the solution to my weakness and the person who exploited it. Jerome is the solution without the exposure. He reports to me, his work is reviewed quarterly by an external accountant, and there are controls in the billing system now that require dual authorization for any deviation from contracted rates. Simple, obvious in retrospect. The kind of thing I should have insisted on from the beginning, regardless of how much I trusted whoever was sitting across from me. I learned that lesson at a cost I would not have chosen. I have decided that the only reasonable response to an expensive lesson is to make sure you actually learned it. Now let me tell you the part that is less clean, because I promised a proper ending, and a proper ending requires honesty about the full picture. Not just the professional one I heard from Renee 6 weeks ago, not through lawyers, directly. A single email, brief, arriving on a Tuesday morning, the way significant things in my professional life apparently prefer to arrive. She said she was not writing to ask for anything or to revisit anything that had been resolved. She said she was writing because she had been sitting with something for 7 months that she needed to say directly rather than leave unsaid. She said that in 6 years of partnership, I had been the most honest and generous professional relationship she had ever had, and that what she had done was a betrayal of something that deserved better, and that she was sorry, not in the way she had been sorry when she sat across from me in our office on that Tuesday morning, but in the way you are sorry 7 months later when the full weight of what you did has had time to settle into something permanent. She said she hoped Clarity Solutions was everything it deserved to be. She said she hoped I was well. She did not ask me to respond. I sat with that email for 4 days before I decided what to do with it. On the 5th day, I wrote back 1 paragraph. I told her that Clarity Solutions was standing and that I was well and that I appreciated her writing. I told her that I had thought about the 6 years more than the 14 months, and that I believed both of those things were true simultaneously, and that I had decided to hold them that way rather than let one cancel the other. I told her I hoped Philip was safe. I told her I hoped she found her way through what came next. I did not tell her I forgave her because I am not sure forgiveness is the right word for what I actually feel, and I do not believe in using words that are not accurate just because they are the ones people expect. What I feel is something more like acceptance, the acceptance of something that happened that cannot be unhappened, and that I have decided not to let define either the business or the person I am going forward. She responded the same day with 2 words: "Thank you." That was all. I filed the exchange with a days for the record, as I had been advised to do with any direct communication, and then I closed my laptop and went back to work. The chair on the other side of my desk has been moved, not dramatically, just repositioned slightly so that it sits at an angle rather than directly across from me the way it always used to. I did it on a Monday morning 3 weeks ago, not because I had planned to, but because I walked in and looked at it and understood that I was finally doing it, because I wanted the space to look a certain way rather than because I was reacting to an absence. That felt like the right moment. I trust that kind of feeling now more than I used to. It has served me better than I expected. Clarity Solutions turns 7 years old next month. I am going to mark the occasion with the 8 employees who helped me hold it together through the hardest period it has faced, and with the 6 clients who chose to stay, and with Jerome, who has been here for 6 weeks and who already feels like he belongs in the room. I am going to buy the same bottle of wine that Renee and I bought every year since year one. Not because I am unaware of how that sounds, because that ritual belonged to the business before it belonged to the partnership, and I have decided that the business gets to keep it. And some things you build survive the people who helped you build them. Clarity Solutions is one of those things. I know that now in a way I could not have known before the Tuesday morning that tested it. I am grateful for the knowing, even though I would not have chosen the way it came. That is the full story. I do not expect to post again. Here is how Reddit responded to the final update. User Practical Priya says, "The bottle of wine, the same one bought every year since year one. OP reclaiming that ritual for the business rather than letting it belong to the partnership that ended is the most quietly powerful thing in this entire story. That is not denial. That is someone who knows exactly what they built and who they built it for, and who has decided that what was good about it belongs to them and not to what went wrong." User Tired of Soft People says, Jerome asking better questions in his first week than expected. The dual authorization controls on billing deviations. The external quarterly accountant review. OP did not just survive this. She used it to build something structurally stronger than what existed before. That is the real ending of the story. Not the legal documents, not the email exchange with Renee, the business that came out the other side better than the one that went in. User Quiet Observer 99 says, I have been following this story from the first post, and I want to say that the 2 words Renee sent back, "thank you," hit me harder than anything else in this final update. 7 months of carrying what she did and watching what it cost the person she did it to, and when finally given an opening to say more than 2 words, she said 2 words. I think she understood that 2 words was exactly what the moment called for, and that saying more would have been about her rather than about OP. That restraint tells me something about who Renee actually is underneath everything that happened. User Watching from Afar says, OP said she does not use the word forgiveness because she is not sure it is accurate and does not believe in using words that are not accurate just because they are expected. And then she described acceptance. The acceptance of something that happened that cannot be unhappened, and that she has decided not to let define her going forward. I have been trying to find the right word for what I hope to feel about the hard things in my own life for a long time. I think OP just gave it to me. User Fair and Square 44 says, 7 years old next month, 8 employees, 6 loyal clients, a new financial director asking the right questions, a repositioned chair, a bottle of wine that belongs to the business now. That is what it looks like when something real survives something that would have destroyed something built on shakier ground. Congratulations, OP. You earned every single bit of this. And that is the full story, a 6-year partnership built from nothing on a paper placemat in a diner. 14 months of secrets that unraveled on a Tuesday morning before anyone else arrived at the office. A resolution that was not triumphant and not clean, but honest all the way through. And a business that came out the other side of the hardest thing it had ever faced, structurally stronger, relationally tested, and still standing. What I take from this story is something OP said that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I first read it. That complete trust lives in you and not in the other person. That the version of trust that makes you certain is not evidence of the other person's character. It is evidence of yours, and that the gap between those two things is where the expensive lessons live. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment below and tell me what part stayed with you the longest. And if you have been here from the first post, to this final update and you are not subscribed yet, I genuinely do not know what you are waiting for, because this is exactly the kind of content we bring you every single month. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next one.